We're going to continue with our study of Lech Lecha and Mareh Yaakov. We're in the section on Lech Lecha, page 13, Bereshit Yud Beit Pasuk Yud, Genesis 12, verse 10. Vayhi, and it was. This is a mercha, so this is going to be lightly connected to what's come from before, and mostly driving us into what's going to come afterwards. So you'll remember that Avram had decided to pitch his tent in the Negev, where he was least connected to everything in the society around him, the society in Canaan, because he wanted to distance himself from that as well. And yet, anybody who would come to him, he would have the ability to influence them in the most thorough way, because he was still in the land, but he was selling something completely different. So he had the least amount of influence of the local around him. So Vayhi, lightly tied to that, but mostly moving forward into what's going on. Number one, after Avram had arrived in the Negev, in relation with the end of the previous sentence, thinking he had finally achieved a desirable resting spot, a new difficulty emerged, and it was forcing him to continue his wandering, as indicated by the directional shape of the reading mark. So he had to go on from there. He had to move on, and there's a general debate in the Gemara that whenever we see Vayehi, something bad is going to happen. They try and bring some exceptions and say whether those were in fact good or bad, but we'll say that this one certainly agrees with the trend of Vayehi, portending something bad that's going to happen. Ra'av, a famine with a tipcha. So this is going to focus us backwards and pause slightly afterwards. A famine broke out and life became intolerable, particularly when his meager reserves started to become exhausted, as shown by the closing shape of the directional reading mark. So I think it's interesting that he's saying that this is at the very end part of the famine, that when he had nothing left, that's the only time that Avram chose to leave. And I'm not quite sure where he derives that this is the point in time that we're talking about.
So it wasn't like Elimelech in route.
He waited it out, but I don't see a connection with anything that we've learned about Tipcha that tells us that in fact that's the time, not at the beginning of the famine, or not a certain period in, or just to the point where his supplies become exhausted. I'm not quite sure where that comes from.
But why do we think that at this point he starts with large supplies? In other words, is it possible that at this point in his career, he's not very wealthy, he doesn't have lots of possessions, he's just small? In other words, all the gifts that he gets when he defeats the Malachim, when he has all the expansion of his personal wealth, I believe, if I remember, and forgive me if I'm wrong, I believe it comes later on in the story. Mashma, it could be he's not yet there. So
he's definitely bringing with him et hanefesh asher sabach.
Right.
So he's definitely supporting some people.
Right.
So he has some means with him. But that's the only twice he builds an altar, so he also has something that is disposable that he can give away. So at the very least, he certainly was not destitute before this happened. But those are the only concrete words that tell us that at least he had some possessions before this.
Right. And
now this is something that deprives him even of that.
Just an aside, usually I don't want to agree with you, Sheldon, but I have to in this case. I'll stick up for you. When you were talking about the numbers, because you mentioned the king, so it says, what is by Yurik Kanechav, that they learned 314 people, but then Rashi or someone says it's really only one person or something, him and Eliezer. You know what I'm talking about?
I totally disagree.
That's what I get for sticking up for you. Good, it'll be the last time.
We will talk about that one in a couple of weeks.
I'm not sure.
Yes. Ba'aretz, in the land, number 3, with the stabilizing et nachta, and we're going to specifically look at the shape of et nachta before we read this comment. I think this is the one that he did it.
Was it last
Yeah.
Under the bar is number 3.
So under the aleph, you'll notice that the etnafta is rounded and wide on the bottom with a line in the middle pointing up. So we're going to start with, and that's, it's sort of the stable legs with something pointing up from that. Number 3, not only did it affect his area, but it became generalized in the land of the neighboring districts as stressed by the stabilizing shape of the reading mark. So everywhere literally was having the same thing. So everywhere had an equilibrium about it. So that sort of that wide, broad base that you see.
Global warming trumps fault. Just got to say.
This is one of the tests. One of the 10 tests is leaving. So did
Correct.
he fail the test by leaving or no? What's the word on that?
So most of the Mefarshim say he passed every one of the tests, and there are a small number of Mefarshim who say he failed each and every one of the tests.
Really?
All of them?
All of them.
Really?
Really?
So again, that doesn't make him any less great. Just because you're put into that situation, because you have the possibility. We firmly believe that any situation you're put into, you have the ability, given your resources, to overcome. That doesn't mean that you're always going to win, and it doesn't mean that you're not treated meritoriously for effort or for getting close but still failing.
Just as a digression, because this is too good a statement. How did he fail the Akedah?
According to
Like what would be according to that Mefarsh?
So he.
So you're like that Midrash about that famous about Sarah, who says when it wasn't good enough for
at
you.
the very first offer of doing something else, he jumps on that and he doesn't say, but I was told to do it.
Oh, that would be the thing you should do.
So the question becomes is if it truly was a test of God's word versus rationality, then he doesn't stand up for God's word to the very last. He comes close.
But he
exactly.
He recognized that it was a malach that told him this.
So I guess he would say only if he heard it from God. He said, no, you're just a malach. I have to hear it from God. Maybe that's the only way that would be considered not a. You know what I mean? And he could have said, no, you're just a malach. God told me, and until I hear it from God himself, and he says it's canceled.
Monday morning
Then, you know what I mean? Sue, are you listening?
I'm listening. I'm
So
thinking about what you're saying.
again, it's a question of we're always tested on our intent, and the question was, did he at some point really have an intent to look for any way out of this? That's usually the point of failure that you'll have to look for in a moral test.
By the way, there's a midrash about Sarah. Sarah was very disappointed. She says, "What? It's not good enough for you." Like she was disappointed that God
good enough.
That Yitzchak, yeah, she says, "I didn't raise a kid because God rejects him in the end." Like thank God. But you know what I mean? But she says,
yes,
she says, "What? He's not good enough for you." She's disappointed that he wasn't taken as a sacrifice. So she passed the test for sure. No one can criticize her, except for being an idiot.
And alternatively, the test was, can he actually withdraw his hand? Right.
I'm never going to make a difference. You I can't.
No. The test is the opposite.
The test was the opposite. The test was can you be so devoted to something, and then still pull away,
pull back, and understand that at a certain point there's a certain morality that supersedes all others.
Even though you prepared yourself for something and
you're prepared to do something that all the barbarians around you do.
Yeah.
And then the last minute God tells you, no, that's not what Jews do. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
So according
to
to
that a test.
So you passed that test, I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's just an alternative.
So as I said, most of the Mefarshim say that he passed each and every one of these tests. So.
Yeah, that's what we're going.
Ba'aretz. So we have a side comment note. Ba'aretz, in the land. That quote land is not specified by a descriptive name for several reasons. A, because it did not yet have an established name, and B, because this land had specific properties. It is subjected to spread influences from up downwards and from down to the periphery, which are indicated by the shape of the reading mark. So again, we're going to look at our etnafta. Our etnafta has that line in the center pointing up to down. So things flow down from God to this land, and then they spread sideways to the edges along the shape of the etnafta. So we got that from up downwards, and from downwards to the periphery of the land.
So you think the etnafta is the shape of the
So
land
the
itself?
etnafta is the way that God's influence spreads itself throughout the land. So you might consider Yerushalayim or Har Habayit as the point that it flows down to first, and then from there it flows out to the rest of the land, and it encompasses the whole. So from up downwards and from downwards spreading out. I thought that was an interesting use of the shape of the note.
And also topographically, like the oldest road is the road of the patriarch.
Mm-hmm.
So on either side there's a Jordan belongs to, that could be also.
And I thought it was a Mercedes-Benz symbol.
I don't know, when we were in China, they said you always showed us the software. So I guess it depends where you are.
ECG 1, 2, 3.
Mm-hmm. Number 4.
By the way, just since you mentioned Mercedes-Benz, okay, say that for me. No, because I just saw a documentary yesterday about Harvey Weinstein, and they said Mercedes-Benz is the one that changed, because what Harvey Weinstein did is not new. I know they don't have to hear this in the joke, but that's like the casting couch is old, but so what was the difference this time is that the advertiser, Mercedes-Benz was the first one to pull their advertising, and it's all about money. And once they pulled out, other people wouldn't advertise, and that's what made the difference. When the advertisers pulled out, Harvey Weinstein didn't pull out, and then pulled out. Yeah.
And again, another interesting sort of use of a note on top of a word. So vayered, and he went down, with a pashta, a note that influences it, elevates it, and points up. So we have something very opposite happening here, right? We have the exact opposite note going on the word. Avram felt he was on a high spiritual level, accompanied by an emotional balance. And he went down because he sensed that the will of God desired him to do so, as denoted by the directional shape of the reading mark. So even though he's going down for an elevated reason and with a sense of elevation about himself. So I thought that the contrast there was very important to point out.
So he was going for Pesach.
Is it possible that that's the only vayered with the pashta on it, or no?
Most times you see the word vayered, it's got a darga.
Right, yeah.
Almost always.
In my case, it's very interesting.
It'd be interesting if the other ones were it is. It's like one of the Shoshalas on Vayishchat is also like counterintuitive.
So the sort of typical ones of Vayered are during when God comes down to Mount Sinai to give the Torah. Vayered Hashem, God comes down to the mountain, and then Moshe comes down to meet God. God comes down to meet Moshe again. Vayered. So we've got 2 psukim in a row with Vayered with the Dargat Tevir. So that's sort of one of the ways where you can typically learn that Vayered and Darga going down to a lower level. So God is coming down to earth to meet the people, literally to give them Torah on their level. So Avram, number 5, with a mapach. So this is going to sweep what's come from before and focus it to a more narrow point. Avram knew that this urge for further wandering is equally controlled from above, and it is only another phase of the initial Lech Lecha, which will have future implications as expressed by the shape of the reading mark. So we're going to fold in what we had at the beginning of the Parsha, the Lech Lecha, and we're going to go to the next specific goal that he's got to go towards. So he knows that this is the general command that he's been given, and he's just going to take it to this specific incidents and follow it. Incidents, either. Mitzrayma. And again, we have the lower place given the higher notes, and when we have, so when we have a pashta on the syllable that's not accented, then so the pashta always comes at the end of the word. But if that's not the syllable that gets the accent, then we put a second pashta there. So we'll notice we have two pashtas, with the first one on the resh, which is the accented syllable, and the second one in the natural place for a pashta. And I have to. I'm just looking at number 4, and I have to think why that pashta is pushed back to the first syllable. I'll have to look that up.
Is this a typo when it says in English towards Egypt? Why is that put over?
Because Mitzrayim is
Mitzrayim.
Oh, so he's reading it literally.
Yeah. So Mitzrayim with two pashtas, so we're going to get a double meaning here and a sense of elevation or putting importance. This journey towards Egypt has a double purpose for Avram. So again, we've got two pashtot, so we're going to see a double purpose. A, to bring temporary relief from hunger for Avram himself, and B, to initiate a bridge to Egypt as a preparation to the stand on Sinai as specified by the double directional shape of the reading mark. So even though he is going towards the place that is lower, he is going to go to it for two elevated purposes. Number 1, to preserve himself, and number 2, to preserve the history that's going to happen there. Lagur, for sojourning, with a munach, so this is going to have a division from what's come from before and then move forward into what's going to go afterwards. Avram's coming to Egypt for sojourning, lagur, gerut, marks the beginning of slavery, because after his high level of spirit in the Negev, he went down to the center of witchcraft, idol worship, moral depletion, sex orgies, etc. Me'igraram libira amivta. From a tall mountain or a tall roof to the lowest pit, and that's a quote from Gemara. So literally, it means to go from the highest level to the lowest level. So again, we see the highest and the lowest in Mitzrayim, which is the lowest place, and it's being elevated with a note that tells you that it's going to go up. So the lowest place is going to be elevated by Avram's presence. I'm sorry, Lagur. So sorry, we were talking about the Munach.
Right.
So we're going to have the separation of Mitzrayim's essence from what it's going to become. So Mitzrayim, being the lowest place, is going to, in future, host some of the highest events. So we're going to separate out the way Mitzrayim was from before sharply from the way that it's going to be seen afterwards. Sham, there, with a katon, a two-part note. There, number 8. There, Avram learned the harsh nature of the Egyptians, along with future hardships of his children, and he paved the road for their survival, as pointed out by the bipartite shape of the reading mark. So he's going to see both the low end that the Jews are going to achieve there and the heights that they're going to arise as they come out. So we're going to see that two-part note there. Ki kaved, because heavy with a mercha, likely connected to what's come from before and mostly moving us forward into what's going to go afterwards. He took some of the load by himself, because heavy it would be for his children to bear the full weight of the suffering by themselves, as conveyed by the directional shape of the reading mark. So the difficulties that they're going to have later are going to be tied to what Avram does there now. So he's going to Masei Avot Siman Avadim. So he's going to literally